You mentioned privacy rights, which is the other aspect of this whole vaccination. A, can you require vaccination? B, can you ask about it? And I'll throw C in and sort of combine a few things. Can you tell others, i.e., customers, about it? So I'm going to kind of lump all those together at once, and I'll tell the story that, Brittany, you've heard before, which is a couple of weeks ago. I had to call for in-home service, and I was talking to the woman who was going to assign someone to come to our house. And at the end of the call, she very happily assured me that I should not worry because the guy that they were going to send to our house will have been fully vaccinated. And I got off the phone. I thought that was great. That was really good customer service. It made me feel more comfortable. And then, being an employment lawyer, I thought, wait a minute, does this guy know that they are sharing his personal information with all of their customers? And I'm sure they never even turn their minds to it. But if you take a technical interpretation, that is personal information. They're sharing it. Maybe he consented, but I'm not sure he would have. So maybe you can try to tackle all of that.
No problem.
In about a minute and a half.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, again, this is getting back to that issue of employee privacy. So can you ask if somebody's had the vaccine? I mean, you can certainly ask. I think the question is, can you require them to tell you? And if an employee doesn't want to tell you whether or not they have been vaccinated, I mean, I think to me, the question is, well, what happens then if they don't want to tell you that they've been vaccinated? Don't you just lump them into the same group as people who are not vaccinated, right? Isn't that the way to deal with something like that, is to just assume, or rather put them in the category of somebody that you don't know? And so you've got to treat them as if they're an unvaccinated employee. In terms of collecting and then disclosing that information, we have to keep in mind that there is privacy legislation across Canada. Some provinces have very specific privacy legislation, which has specific requirements in terms of disclosing why you are collecting the information and what you're going to use it for, right? So it's one thing to collect the information from the employee if they're willing to give that to you, but it's a whole other thing to then share that information with others. So if that's something that an employer wants to do, if a business wants to have that ability to say to their customers, all of our staff are vaccinated, or this particular service person who's coming to visit you is vaccinated, that's something that we would recommend that you get that consent for in advance. So when you are collecting the information, you are being very clear what the information is going to be used for. And if one of the things it's going to be used for is sharing that information to try to make customers more comfortable, great. Make that really clear to the employee ahead of time so that you avoid those privacy issues down the line.
Yeah, and I think that was a pretty good summary of a whole bunch of questions lumped together. But I think, the bottom line, I think we're probably going to say this again at some point, is be mindful of all of these legal issues. And we teach this, we teach a course, it's HR Law for HR professionals. And one of the points that I've always made since I started that course 15 years ago was you can't look at any issue and with just one lens. It's not just an employment standards question or a human rights question or a safety question. It's all of those things. So you might be saying that for safety purposes, we're going to mandate vaccination and tell the whole world. But you've also got to be mindful of privacy laws and everything else, including contract. So just be very cautious before making any of these decisions. And I guess that's probably a good segue to where I wanted to go next, which is accommodation. Because even if you were going to mandate vaccination, there are always going to be the exceptions. So maybe you can talk a bit about when you need to accommodate.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, accommodation in a COVID context is usually going to arise in situations where somebody can't wear a mask or somebody can't get the vaccine. But it can also arise in situations like where employees have childcare obligations, right? So anytime a protected ground is going to be activated, there is going to be a corresponding duty to accommodate. Now, in terms of not being able to wear masks, there are going to be situations where an individual is not going to be able to wear a mask either because of a disability, if they have a respiratory illness that makes breathing with a mask on difficult, or even because of their age, right? We know that very young children can't wear masks, right? For example, hopefully you're not employing any 2-year-olds, but, but that's something to keep in mind as well. And now what this doesn't do, I think this is really important, is it doesn't protect people who just don't want to wear a mask, right? Or people who just don't want to get the vaccine. It's protecting individuals who have a legitimate basis that's grounded in a protected ground for saying we can't wear the mask or we can't get the vaccine. And in terms of what accommodation is going to look like, again, you're asking that question of, well, what alternatives are available for me, right? If I can't have my employees wear a mask, is there some other way that I can still ensure health and safety in the workplace while accommodating them? And that might mean that they continue working remotely, that they're not coming into the office. It might mean that they are segregated in the office so that they're not near anybody. And if they can maintain social distancing, perhaps they don't need to wear a mask, right? So there may be ways that you can still accommodate that person while allowing them to still participate actively in the workplace. Now, ultimately, if you get to the point where that's just not possible, there is no way to have that person in the workplace or allow them to work remotely, then you've still got infectious disease emergency leave, right? You've still got a leave of absence. You can accommodate somebody by allowing them to take some time away from the workplace until the requirements start changing, until we start reaching that level of vaccination where maybe some of these protocols are loosened in the workplace. And then same thing with when we're talking about, like, really quickly, just childcare obligations. We know that some daycares are still closed. We're hoping everybody's back to school in the fall, but who knows, right? And so the same kind of flexibility has to apply in this aspect. If you've got an employee who needs to be able to drop off their kids at a certain time, or has to be home because their kids don't have daycare or other care options available for them, then there may be a duty to accommodate there. And that could include, again, allowing them to work remotely. It could include flexible hours. It can also include allowing somebody to take a leave, right? So there's a lot of forms of accommodation that are available to employers. And as always, I think in terms of tips, the two main things are: need is not the same as a preference, or rather a preference is not the same as the need, is the way to say that. And also, for employers, never make assumptions, right? If you've got an employee coming to you who's requesting accommodation, who says, I can't wear a mask, or I can't get vaccinated, or I need accommodation for my kids, listen, take the information or get the information that you need, and then assess whether or not accommodation is possible in the workplace. It doesn't mean that you're going to come up with an answer that everybody's going to be happy with, but if you're at least doing the exercise and you're documenting the exercise and you're doing it in good faith, then you're at least going to have significantly protected yourself in the event of a claim in the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of important points packed into that, but the key point, as you said, need versus preference, and also documentation, right? I mean, we've all heard people who say, that they cannot wear a mask, and many people have legitimate health reasons why they can't. Others just don't like wearing masks, and there's a big difference there. So you're entitled to require appropriate documentation or supporting information to show that there is a need for whatever form of accommodation. And the other important point, which you've alluded to, is the employee doesn't get to choose their form of accommodation. So they might say, I want to be accommodated by working from home. But you might say that, no, we can accommodate you perfectly well by having you in the workplace, but physically segregated. So the employee doesn't get to choose. And I don't want to go down into this rabbit hole, but I think we did talk about this the other day, the sort of perverse scenario where if someone wants to continue working from home and they know that their employer wants them to return, they might actually claim not to be vaccinated because they'll assume that at that point their employer will order them to stay at home, which is a really ridiculous scenario. But this is kind of what keeps employment law going, are the anomalies like that, where someone's going to try to abuse the system. So something to be mindful of. But again, the important point here is, as an employer, you have a duty to accommodate to the point of undue hardship, but you can choose the form of accommodation as long as it's reasonable. And as you said, one form of accommodation might be a leave of absence, which is unpaid. So it's not a great scenario for the employee, but it might be the only viable one in those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.